Welcome to Literary Libations with Librarians. And this time we are celebrating Black history and Black voices as part of Black History Month. And while we hope that we spotlight diverse voices throughout the year, we do want to take this moment to really talk about those Black voices and what they are saying and have said in the past. As we're sharing these titles, if you'd like to get your hands on any of them, there are several ways to go about doing that. The first would be to call your local branch of the Monroe County Library System and talk to the staff there. They will be more than happy to assist you. The next would be to go to our online catalog, and the web address for that is on your screen now. And through that, you can request hardcover, paperback, audio CDs, and large print. You will see that some of the titles we talk about are available on one of our 2 digital apps. And for those, you would go directly to the app. The first is Libby. And you may hear Libby referred to also as Overdrive. They're kind of going through a branding name change. But if you go to your store on your device, search for Libby. And Libby offers downloadable ebooks, audiobooks, and also magazines. The other is Hoopla, and Hoopla offers downloadable ebooks, audiobooks, and also movies, music, and graphic novels. And the great thing about Hoopla is if you see a lightning bolt next to the title, there will not be a wait for that. So that is a lovely option if you want something that you can download immediately. I am Jennifer Graneski, and I am the community librarian at the Dundee branch. And as we kick off this week, we always start with an introductory question. And the one for this week is to share about a Black artist, writer, history maker, athlete who inspires you. And for me, I chose Austin Channing Brown, who is a contemporary writer. She wrote, "I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness." And I can't remember if I read it last year or the year before. And what stood out to me was how she was able to describe what it is like as a Black woman working in white spaces. And it was eye-opening, things that I had never considered. How she would say something, and oftentimes the reaction of people was, well, that's not what I intended. And she explains really clearly that sometimes your intentions don't matter. If you kick somebody in the face accidentally, you still kicked them in the face. So you may do things with good intentions and say things without a bad intention, but you still did it. So I took that, and then she also shares a story that is set in a library. She went to the library. She was able to walk to her library. She went to the library, had books to check out, went up to check them out, did not know the librarian behind the counter. The librarian behind the counter was white. She gave her her card. The librarian scanned it, and her name came up as Austin Channing Brown. And that librarian made her think that that wasn't this little Black girl's card. And she looked at her and said, "Is this your card?" And just that tone of voice, the body language to a small child, to suggest to a child that your name doesn't correspond with who you are or what you look like. It just made, I'm like, help me learn from this. Help me never to assume something like that or make a person feel less than for who they are. It's a really powerful book. She also does a wonderful email newsletter that focuses on justice, joy, and storytelling and entrepreneurship for Black women. And it's fabulous. So I feel like every time I read something by her or hear her talk on a podcast, that I learn something new. So she is my inspiration. So also with us today is Jessica Otto, who is our head of collections here at the Monroe County Library System. And who inspires you, Jessica?
For me, it's Shaquem Griffin, who is the first one-handed person to be drafted into the NFL, the National Football League. My understanding is, so he was born with something called amniotic band syndrome, which caused his left hand to not fully develop, and it actually caused him a great deal of pain. And so at the age of 4, the decision was made to amputate his hand. But despite that, he still kept up with wanting to play sports. He also has a twin brother that plays sports as well. He was still able to play football in high school. He went on to play for UCF in college, the University of Central Florida. And not only did he play, not just was he part of the team, but he was actually named the 2016 Peach Bowl Defensive MVP and the 2016 AAC Defensive Player of the Year. In 2018 is when he went to what they call the NFL Combine. He ended up being drafted by the Seattle Seahawks, which is not only cool that he was the first one-handed person in the NFL, but also his twin brother was already playing for the Seattle Seahawks. So they played together in college. They got to play together in the NFL as well. And he also was, his position that he plays is linebacker, and he has the record for the fastest time for the 40-yard dash for a linebacker. He ran it in 4.38 seconds. Which his official NFL stats list him at 6 foot, 200 pounds. So that's pretty fast for someone of that size. So that's quite impressive to me. And then in 2019, he was awarded the NCAA Inspiration Award, which is an award that is given out to NCAA affiliated athletes for inspirational efforts in dealing with life-altering personal situations. So I just, he's an amazing inspiration to me, and to see that, that we all face different challenges. We don't all have the same challenge that he did, but that we can work hard and we can still work toward our goals and achieve our dreams despite the challenges, and not let them overtake us or overcome us. So yeah, he's just always been such an inspiration to me.
That's fascinating. And his is a name that I was unaware of until you shared that. So thank you, Jessica.
Welcome.
Also with us this week is Suzanne Krueger, who is the community librarian at IDA. And who inspires you, Suzanne?
Well, so, these are, I have 2, they're pretty easy and they're pretty short. So Oprah Winfrey, who has been just amazing through the years with all that she has done and brought to the world, starting from humble roots and being abused as a child, sexually abused as a child, to overcome these things and be such a mogul in the industry that she's in. And she seems like such a genuine, compassionate person above all, and I think that's inspiring. And I guess the second person that I've always thought was really awesome was Dr. Ben Carson's mother, who couldn't read herself, but figured out that she wanted something more for her children, and she figured out how to get that for them, and would have them read to her when she couldn't even read, and they became, such successful people. And so those are my 2, short and sweet.
You, Suzanne. I did not know that about Dr. Carson's mother. That is incredible.
Yes.
So thank you.
She's not able to read. Yep.
And also with us this week is Jody Russ, the community librarian at our Bedford branch. And who inspires you, Jody?
Well, I have to say I didn't plan very well for this question, like it seems the rest of you may have done. So I'm going to throw out several people. I think Amanda Gorman, for one, whose voice is amazing and whose message is amazing, and for how young she is to have the courage and the poise to do what she's doing is also truly amazing. Obviously, Barack and Michelle Obama. I'm going to talk about Martin Luther King Jr. I would say him. I would say Jackie Robinson for being a baseball player, breaking the color barrier as a baseball player. But I also, I just finished the book Infidel by Ayan, I'm not going to say her name right. Ayan somebody Ali. Gosh, see how I'm not prepared for such things. But she's written several books now, and she's a Somalian. She was born in Somalia. She was raised Somalian, raised as a Muslim, and she ended up, the first book that she wrote, called Infidel, she had moved to Holland and become a refugee in Holland, and then became a naturalized citizen there, became a member of their parliament, tried to develop an understanding. I guess the reason why I found her inspirational, and I'll be reading her next book too, is because she went to she was brave enough to leave. Her father had arranged a marriage for her that she didn't want to be in, and she had already seen what happens to women in particular in the community that they would normally live in. So she was brave enough to run away from that situation when she was on her way to meet this man that was supposed to become her husband, and joined this refugee camp in Holland. But then beyond that, she felt it was important to get into politics to help people understand the people in Holland, and I think we could say this for anybody who accepts refugees, think that they're doing a good thing by allowing the people to come to their country but settle in their own space and continue their own customs. Her point being, the customs of her faith are devastating to women. And if they don't recognize that when they come in as refugees and help them learn that it doesn't have to be like that, that they can have their faith but not continue the atrocities that they do at this particular time, although some of that has gotten quite a bit better since then, but it's still not, that things won't ever get better. And so her message is very strong, and she obviously is fighting hard for that. So
thank you, Jody. I think all of you shared about somebody who I was completely unaware of. So you learn something every single day, especially if you work at the library. And now we're going to go ahead and start talking about our books. And I'm going to ask Jessica to get us started.
Okay, so my first title is a brand new item in our collection. I am so happy that I just happened to come across this. It's called The Oldest Student, excuse me, How Mary Walker Learned to Read. Mary Walker was born into slavery in 1848. And she was freed from slavery at the age of 15. But she, even though she was freed, like it was a whole, freedom wasn't exactly free. Like she had to go out and learn, like, okay, now we have to take care of ourselves. Now we have to work. And so she ended up having to work very hard, and so to earn money to get by, and was not able to have time for an education. And then by age 20, she found herself married. She had a child. Her first husband passed away, and then she remarried and have 2 more children. And she was just constantly having to work for her family to support them. And as much as she had a desire to learn to read, to educate herself, she never quite found time to do that. And then later in life, she found herself living in sort of like a retirement apartment area. And she actually lived to be 121. At age 114, all of her family that she had, like her husband and her children, had passed away. And she was all alone. And she decided that she was going to finally take some time for herself and to teach herself to read, because she said it wasn't even about learning how to necessarily read a whole book, but just she didn't like the fact that looking out of the room in her apartment, that she would look at signs on buildings and the names of like stores or restaurants, and she didn't know what any of it meant. It was just scribbles to her. So it was very important for her to end her life with being able to read. So at age 116, she set out to learn how to read. She worked with a tutor named Helen Kelly, who worked with her, and between the ages of 116 and 121, she started to learn how to read. She was eventually given a graduation certificate from her teacher, Helen Kelly, declaring that she was able to read, and it was just a big story in the area where she lived. One of the photographs on the slides show her being sort of interviewed by the news and everything. So I thought that was a wonderfully inspiring story that she eventually she fulfilled her dream of giving herself this bit of education and being able to read. So my second title, it's also a new item in our collection. It's called She Raised Her Voice, 50 Black Women Who Sang Their Way into Music History. This is a fascinating book. So it's set up in the way of sort of like an encyclopedia where there's 50 different entries for each of the women. All the entries are set up in a similar format. They contain the name of the musician. They give their birth date, and then also in the case of the women that are deceased, they also give their death date as well. They list what type of music they were associated with, such as R&B or pop or jazz. And then they also list what is sort of their nickname, I guess you could say, or kind of what they're known for. So for like Tracy Chapman is one of the entries. They say they list her as the revolutionary singer songwriter. They have Elizabeth Cotton. She is listed as a true musical treasure. Each entry also contains a quote from each of the women, which is followed by a brief biography of each of the musicians. And of course, each entry also has a fantastic illustration. I was beyond impressed with the illustrations in this book. They just look so much like the people the illustrator did an amazing job. And it's great. This is a great book that you could certainly read through the entire book, or maybe if you have like a homework assignment, or you were looking to find somebody to do like a homework assignment about a biography or report, certainly you could get some basic information about each of these women here, and then look further in our library system and see what other works we have on each of these individuals. Towards the back of the book. So one of the things I did notice when I was reading is that it tends to use a lot of music specific terms that maybe not everyone would be familiar with. So it's great at the back of the book, they do include a glossary of music terms for people who are not familiar with terms such as improvisation or big band or arranger, all those kinds of things. So I thought that was great that they included that. So yeah, this is a wonderful book. I'm so glad that it has come into our collection, and I'm excited to share it with you today.
Thank you, Jessica. And let's have Suzanne share her title next.
All right, well, my book is Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. And Isabel Wilkerson is an American journalist, and she is an author also of The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's greatest migration. And she has a long history of being a writer, a journalist. In '94, she worked for she was the Chicago bureau chief of the New York Times. During that time, she got a Pulitzer Prize for her writing, her coverage of the 1993 Midwestern floods. And she's just an amazing writer. So she has come up with this book, caste, the origins of our discontents, and she likens the caste system of India, the caste system that the Nazis implemented, to that of an American caste system. And she goes through like 8 pillars of caste and shows us what our origins here of with slavery and how we became so prejudiced. And it's this separation. It goes back for at least our founding slave heritage, that it was a divine kind of thing where the slavers would quote the Bible, the story of Noah, where Noah's had 3 sons, and Ham walked in on Noah when he was asleep in his tent and saw him naked. And for that reason, Noah cursed his son, Canaan, that let me find the location of that, and basically said, cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will be he to his brothers. And so the 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, spread out across the continents, Shem to the east, Ham to the south, and Japheth to the west. It was said, those who decreed themselves the descendants of Japheth would hold fast to the story that translated to their advantage, as the riches from the slaves from trade from the Africans to the New World poured forth to the Spaniards, the Portuguese, and the Dutch, and lastly to the English. The biblical passage would be summoned to condemn the children of Ham and to justify the kidnap and enslavement of millions of human beings and the violence against them. So her writing, she really takes it from the very beginning and she goes through it. She makes these comparisons. She visits India. She visits Germany. One of the things that stood out to me was the fact that where in the world do the losers of a battle, where do we like put up statues and monuments to the losers? No, the world puts up monuments to the winners of a war or a battle. But here in the United States, we've glorified the losers of the battle between the Union and the Confederacy. And that kind of hit home, and it's like, wow, you know, she visits, you know, Germany, and there are no statues to the great leaders of the Nazi regime. There are memorials. People have not forgotten what happened. There are memorials to those people who died, those people who were hurt by the Nazi Germany. And that, like, wow, you know, this is why we want to take down these statues and the Confederate flag. It's not that we're trying to forget history, but we're trying to remember those who were oppressed. And so this is how she talks about caste. A caste system is an artificial construction, a fixed and embedded ranking of human value that sets the presumed supremacy of one group against the presumed inferiority of other groups on the basis of ancestry and often immutable traits that would be neutral in the abstract but are ascribed life and death meaning in a hierarchy favoring the dominant caste whose forebears designed it. A caste system uses rigid, often arbitrary boundaries to keep the ranked groupings apart, distinct from one another in their assigned places. Throughout human history, 3 caste systems have stood out. The tragic exhilarating, chilling, and officially vanquished caste system of Nazi Germany, the lingering millennia-long caste system of India, and the shape-shifting, unspoken, race-based pyramid of the United States. Each version relied on stigmatizing those inferior to justify the dehumanization necessary to keep the lowest ranked people at the bottom and to rationalize the protocols of enforcement. A caste system endures because it's often justified as divine will, originating from sacred text or a presumed laws of nature, reinforced throughout the culture and passed down through the generations. So she goes on to prove how she feels that we have a caste system based on racism here in the United States. In fact, she talks about the Nazi Germans sending over researchers to look at the Jim Crow South laws so that they could study those and take them back and use them in their own country. And there were some laws so strong that even one drop of Negro blood would condemn you. And they felt that was too strong. So they thought some of our stuff was just too strong. So they modified that against the Jews, making it, I think it was like a sixth Jewish, then you were condemned. But it just goes to show there was other people learning from what we had done to use it to other disastrous effects. And it's just heart-wrenching. And, you know, I saw in myself, wow, I am a victim of how I was raised. You know, it's an instilled fear against people, just so many things. I mean, I wasn't raised in an area that had Black people to know and to understand. And it was just so eye-opening. Sorry, I have to take a quick look at my notes. I mean, she likens what we have now to an old house. And in the respect that the house has fractures in its foundation. And she's like the inspector who's going through and looking at all these things. The roof is leaking, the ceilings are warped. And it's not us who created this house that's falling apart, but we're the caretakers. It's come into our possession and now we are the caretakers of this house. And how are we going to fix it? You know, what are we going to do to strengthen it and make it better and keep it going? So she talks about, you know, she focuses on the structure of caste by talking about the emotions of guilt, shame, and blame to allow us to see what's underneath what we thought we knew. When she visited India, she could pick out the people of the lower caste immediately by the way they reacted to others around them, and how their posture, the way they react to the conversations. You know, a person, a Brahmin which is the higher caste, might come over and interject themselves in a lower caste person's conversation by believing it's just their right to do that, even if the two people speaking knew more about the subject than the person of upper class. It's such an amazing book, and I want to talk, I'm sorry, keep talking. She describes 8 pillars of the caste, the foundations of the caste, which are the origins of our discontent. Number 1 pillar being divine will and laws of nature. Pillar 2, heritability of this caste. And in India, that's very much a thing. And I see it with our Black people in the United States. We believe they've inherited this thing that isn't really true. It's only because we support it. 3, the endogamy and the control of marriage and mating. And haven't we seen that? Where in the last century it was against the law for a Black and a white person to marry. The purity versus pollution. She describes in the last century, a little Black boy. He was on a white baseball team. The team won the league. They won the league, and they were all going to go to a pool, but the little Black boy couldn't go in because he would pollute the water if he did. So she has a lot of different examples for all of these different things. Number 5, occupational hierarchy. 6, the dehumanization and stigma. 7, the terror as enforcement, cruelty as a means of control. And 8, inherent superiority versus inherent inferiority. She doesn't tell us, like, this is how we're going to solve this problem, but she gives us an eye-opening view of how all of these things that we've created, whether it's our fault or not, we've inherited this. This is our house now. How are we going to fix it up? And I think it's well written. We spent, for my book club, we discussed it. We've never discussed a book so long that I can remember. And I know my book club likes to chat, but this was a book that we spent so much time on. We agreed you could have a college course on this book. It is an amazing must-read book. It's so eye-opening. And I probably haven't even hit the best parts of it. And I apologize for that. But please, read this book.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I think it's one of my books is actually a fictional book set in the publishing world. And I am so glad that whether it is a publisher that now has a Black CEO or it is somebody who went out and has created their own publishing house, that more Black voices are being published. And even though I really do think George Floyd was a turning point, I hope it was. I hope that more of us are willing to listen and do so with an open mind. And because I have not read Cast, but it reminds me of Stamped and Ibram X. Kendi's work. And the fact is there have been books before this that have probably said much of the same thing, but I don't think we were ready to hear it with a willingness to really hear it and not just push it away and say, well, that's your experience, but to really hear it and say, how can we somehow do better? And it feels overwhelming. In the books that I have read and what I have learned, it does feel overwhelming, but I am so glad that there are authors who are willing to keep fighting the fight. Whether it's Austin Channing Brown, Isabel Wilkerson, Ibram X. Kendi, any of the authors we talk about today and so many more. Jody's going to be talking about an author who has worked on the 1619 Project, which is amazing. So thank you so much for sharing that book, Suzanne.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And Jody, if you would be willing to share your titles with us.
That was a lovely segue into what I'm going to share today. So the first title that I'm going to share, this will be a perfect opportunity for people who are beginning on their journey of understanding. Okay, so I think that Jennifer is exactly correct that George Floyd has changed. It's unfortunate that it took that long, but has changed white people's willingness to listen to the actual story. So the book that I'm going to talk about is called Born on the Water by Nicole Hannah-Jones, and it is from the 1619 Project. It is a children's picture book. It's a J nonfiction, so it's not super young kids probably wouldn't get it, but honestly, I am encouraging every adult I know to start with this book. So like, whereas Suzanne was talking about a book that's very detailed about a lot of the a lot of the in-depth kind of stuff. If you're just starting on this journey, I think Born on the Water would be a fantastic place to start. In my personal and professional search for more information about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I picked up this children's picture book from that 1619 project. It tells the story of a young child who was assigned a project in school to trace their roots, starting with drawing the flag of their ancestral land. So think about that, like the flag of my ancestral land, right, would be, you know, Germany, France, England, Scotland, Ireland, right? So all of these other students in her class had this heritage that they knew about. She didn't know what to do. And so when she went home and told her grandmother about the assignment, she heard the story of her ancestors coming to America in 1619, a whole year before the Mayflower arrived, on a ship called the White Lion as slaves stolen from their homes. This is no immigration story. And so throughout the book, the author keeps saying that this is no immigration story. Before coming to America, they were free. They lived life fully as depicted in the wonderful illustrations in the book. And it talks about all the things that they had, you know, they made their own cloth and they had their own music and they had their own celebrations and they were large communities of families that worked together, and all of a sudden everything changed. And so it's called Born on the Water because they've said that in the past that slaves were born on the water on their way to America because it erased their past. But this grandmother's trying to show this child how important it is to remember that there was a past before that all happened. So on this path of discovery that I am on, I found this book, Born on the Water. It has opened my eyes more directly than many, many other things that I've ever read. I think if you're just new to this and just getting started, and even if you're into it already, this is a really interesting and because it's a picture book, it's a really interesting and impactful way to understand where they had been. And then, you know, what, and interesting enough, the book that I talked about earlier, Infidel, which wasn't one I was going to discuss today, but I found that very interesting in partnership too, because that family from Somalia, her mother, they ended up moving to Kenya because Somalia was getting ready to have a civil war, and her father was a big leader in the group that was fighting against the current regime. So they moved to Kenya to ensure their safety, right? Well, her dad had 3 different wives and multiple children by every one of them. And so this was just her mom and his 3 kids with her who moved to Kenya, but he was never around because he was busy doing all this other stuff and had 2 other families to take care of too. All part of the problem, right? But her mom called the Kenyans slaves, because to her, they were lower in that caste system, right? They were lower than the Somalians were. And so even among, you know, that's something that me as a middle-class white person in the United States of America doesn't understand in any way, shape, or form. And so some of what we need to get is that different tribes in Africa sold different tribes of Africa to white people to bring them over to be slaves, and they will never forgive them, right? That's a long history besides all of the other history that we're talking about here. So really fascinating to pair some of these things together to develop a deeper understanding. But Born on the Water is a great picture book to start with. I would say any child, probably maybe 4th-ish grade and up, would be good to share that with, and lots of adults as well. And then the other thing that I was going to talk about is I don't really know if we did this for my book club. I don't remember why I actually found this audio recording, but one of the things we have available on Hoopla, there's actually more than one title available on Hoopla, but this particular one was the speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Ultimate Collection. It's a downloadable, available on Hoopla, and we have multiple actual books by Dr. King in our physical collection too. But what I loved about this is that it contains the actual recording of those speeches. And I know that many people have listened to the I Have a Dream speech, and you can hear his voice, but Dr. King was assassinated when I was 2, so I don't remember his life. Dr. Martin Luther King Day wasn't established until 1983. I was in high school. It wasn't celebrated as a federal holiday until after I graduated in 1986. So it's not like we studied Dr. King, like, you know, they do somewhat now for a day. But when I listen to his voice during this audiobook and I hear the crowd reacting as he speaks on topics that are still so important and so necessary today, it really hits home what a great man and a great leader he was. And if he had lived, it makes me wonder, would we have attained greater equality back then? Would George Floyd have even happened? Would we not have to still be striving to reach his dream? One phrase that hit me when I was listening to pieces to refresh my memory. So chapter 11 of this particular downloadable is the I Have a Dream speech. But the sentence that really struck home that I really resounded with me because of everything that's going on right now with voting rights. He said, "We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote." And I think that's something that, and that's not just with Black people, but that's with everybody. Like that is a tragedy that's happening right now, that there are lots and lots of people who are losing their opportunity to vote because of new laws that are getting created. But there's also so many people in my own family, in my own household, that don't see the importance of voting because they don't know what difference it can possibly make. And in our democracy, that is our voice. And if we choose not to use it, we can't expect anything different to happen. So that's it.
All right, thank you, Jody. And my titles, me being me, I saw this one. The Other Black Girl was listed on several best horror lists for this year, or for last year. It was published last year. And I can't resist a good buzzed about horror novel. So I picked it up. It is by Zakiya Dalila Harris. This is a debut novel for her. And it's wonderful. It is scary. It is also satire. It's very funny in spots. It's got a little bit of everything. So 26-year-old editorial assistant Nella Rogers is the only Black employee at Wagner Books, except for the mailroom. But on the editorial publishing floor, it's her. And then one day, Hazel comes in. And Hazel is also Black, and Nella is so excited. This looks like an opportunity to her to have somebody who is going to understand the microaggressions, the difficulty in speaking to colleagues about various frustrations. The publishing world does tend to be very, very white. Zakiya Harris actually worked in publishing prior to writing this, so she is writing satirically from also what she knows and has experienced. So Hazel enters the office. Nella's really excited. She thinks this is going to work out great, and it just sort of doesn't. And she puts it up to, well, we're two different people, everybody's different, but the aura around Hazel is just off. And then Nella starts getting threatening notes, telling her to leave her job immediately. and she doesn't want to believe it, but she starts to believe that maybe Hazel is behind these notes. And Nella starts to obsess over the notes. Things just don't go well, and things start to spiral. And that's about all I can tell you without giving away some of the stuff. It is eye-opening, again, to read a book from a Black perspective about being in a white space, particularly in publishing. She talks about going into a meeting where they're discussing they need more diversity. And somebody speaks up at the meeting and says, but we just published a book by a Black author last year. You know, like there's a certain number that they need to hit to be considered diverse. She talks about going to diversity training, and at the first meeting was mandatory and everybody showed up. The second meeting, about half the people showed up. And at the third meeting, it was her and the woman who brought cupcakes. Like, it just goes downhill. She feels that the training isn't particularly eye-opening, that in order to fight fragility, they start talking about diversity, and the trainer asks, now, you know, what are ways that you feel like an outsider? And Nella's sitting here going, because I am, because everybody can see it because of the color of my skin. And somebody else raises their hand and suggests, well, I'm a left-handed person. Cool. And I get it's satire, but there's a grain there where, you know, people start, well, you know, I've experienced being an outsider too. Not in the same way. So I just think there are moments like that, that if you've worked anywhere, probably in the corporate world, you've experienced some of that. It's very funny. It's very humorous. And I don't want to give away the ending, but it is gut wrenching. Like, it was just, oh. So really good book, worth reading. If you like thrillers, pick it up. The other title is Jason Reynolds and Jason Griffin's Ain't Burned All the Bright. I'm going to put this up here and then I'm going to take it down real quick because I have the book here. This is a mashup of poetry and art. So it is one that you really sort of need to see. So I am going to turn off my background. Hopefully this is going to work. Boop. So that I can hold the book up. So Ain't Burned All the Bright by Jason Reynolds, Jason Griffin. And you can literally read this book in about an hour. It's about one sentence per page along with the artwork. It focuses on the summer of 2020, which is a pivotal summer for so many of us. We're experiencing the pandemic and COVID. We're experiencing George Floyd and the protests that were happening as a result of that. And this is a young Black man during that summer. And this is literally takes place over about 5 minutes in his life. And each section of the book starts with, and I'm sitting here wondering why my mother won't change the channel. He and his brother and sister and his mom are all sitting there and she has the news on. And why the news won't change the story, and why the story won't change into something new. Because at that point in time, and even now, we still hear about violence against Black bodies and Black people, and it's really powerful. It layers on different imagery, particularly with breathing, with George Floyd saying, I can't breathe, and with COVID and how it affected people's ability to breathe. So there's imagery there, imagery with hands, and I have my hands up, raising your hands to stop a cough during COVID. It's layering all of this into a very powerful moment in time. And here's one of them talking about the breathing and freedom to breathe, whether it's from COVID, whether it's from I just want to be who I am and feel that I can breathe and not be afraid or anxious. And then Ain't Burned All the Bright comes from his father actually has COVID and is separated from the rest of the family in a separate room of the house. And so the young man goes down to check on him. And so it says, so I keep peeking through a crack in the door. And when he sees me, he smiles because the fever ain't burned all his bright up yet. And that's so powerful. Thinking of the things Suzanne talked about in Cast and the things that people who were stolen from their homes and were enslaved, and yet they are still speaking out and asking for justice. Their bright is not burned up yet. And then at the end, it goes through and it repeats this line a lot. Why my mother won't change the channel, and why the news won't change the story, and why the story won't change into something other than the every hour rerun about how we won't change the world, or the way we treat the world, or the way we treat each other. It's so well done. It's so powerful. Like I said, you can probably read it in less than an hour. I really think it's going to stick with anybody who reads it. And it's another way of walking in somebody else's shoes. And I think we are learning to do that better, and we're learning to listen more. And I hope that continues. I hope that if you pick up these books, that they are eye-opening and that we learn something from them every time. Thank you to each of you for sharing your titles this week. Thank you to those of you who listened. And we will be back in another few weeks to talk about more books. Thanks. Bye.